Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Linder. I'm president of COPEC, and we're getting ready to start our 2 o'clock financial wellness daily discussion webcast here, live streaming, and happy to have everybody here join us. We've got a great program today. We're going to be talking with Nate Quilter. Again, he does a lot of discussions for us regarding planning and some of the details that go into preparing and projecting out for retirement and other needs that you might have through your financial wellness. And so today, first and foremost, I wanted to go ahead and get started with the disclosure. COPEC is a nonprofit organization providing community education at no cost to the community and also void of any marketing or sales pressure. And so this disclosure discusses a little bit about COPEC, the board members, affiliated companies, and then obviously with my participation and on the board, we have extra affiliated company disclosure on there for retirement strategies. Appreciate the opportunity for you to go ahead and review that. You can also see it at the bottom of the copeceducation.org website under disclosure. That being said, excited about having Nate again here, and we've always got good, lively discussions each week, Nate, and always looking forward to that. Today, we're really going to talk about pensions. This is an old animal, if you will, that really took part in a lot of people's retirement plan, and it's becoming less and less. And even, you know, if you want to think about it, Social Security is like a pension, right? You know, we all participate, whether the company but it's a government-based pension. There's a lot of private pensions that might, you know, some people may have, many people don't anymore. And then there's the state pensions, STRS, PERS, and all of those have different formats and you know, requirements, but they really hold a really solid place in a lot of people's retirement plans.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for having me. And that's absolutely right. You know, there was the old kind of adage, you know, people think of a three-legged stool for their retirement savings back in the day. It was pensions, Social Security, and then assets that you have that you can pull off of that. And, you know, nowadays, the pensions, less and less people have them, number one. But number two, how the different pensions may play in with Social Security and savings, and, you know, how that all goes together is really kind of where the planning aspect goes in. And it's really just important to know what the details of your pension plan are, you know, so you'll know how it fits in. So traditionally, I think most people, when they think of a pension, they think of the old, hey, you retire and you get a guaranteed income every month for the rest of your life. That's what's considered a defined benefit pension plan. It's a promise from the company or the provider to say we will pay you for the rest of your life, and sometimes you can add a survivorship on people as well. Where nowadays there are all different ones. You know, there's what's called a defined contribution, where it isn't a promised monthly payment for the rest of your life. It's a promised amount that they're putting in an account that, you know, it grows to a certain level, and then it's up to you to pull money out, you know, as needed to, and it's up to you to make sure it lasts. So there are all different types of plans out there. So it's really important just to kind of know the details of the type of plan you have and how it fits in with everything else.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, pensions have really been under pressure for a long time. You know, regarding companies getting rid of the pensions. It's I don't want to say it's a financial burden, because you never want to say, you know, being able to help people prepare for retirement is a financial burden. But the reality is that a lot of companies become, they're transitioning over to the 401k more. They may have had it before, but you know, they're definitely switching more to that. Maybe they're increasing even the match than they had before to offset the fact they're getting rid of the pension. But there's been a lot of pressure on that. You know, have you seen that as well?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. So, and it's not necessarily a burden, but it's an uncertainty. You know, so when they do a 401k, for example, if a company does a 401k, they're saying, hey, we promise that we'll match up to X% of your salary when you put it in. Well, they've then made that commitment. They put that money in that year and they kind of wash their hands of it. They don't have to worry about it again. Whereas when they start a pension plan, they promise, hey, we're going to pay, based off of how long you work here, how old you are when you retire, and how much you earned, we're going to pay you this set amount for the rest of your life. Well, if you have somebody who's starting right now at 25 years old at your company and you have a pension plan, you could be paying this person until they're 110 years old. That's a huge commitment to have to know that you've made this promise 100 years into the future potentially, or maybe not quite that, but in some with healthcare these days, maybe it will be 100 years that you'll be promised in the future. So
yeah, if your employee's Moses, maybe, I don't know, but I mean that's just it though, is the uncertainty. You're right, but also they're usually pretty rich. I mean, the requirements, and quite honestly, a lot of companies have higher turnover than they used to as well. Employees are bouncing. It used to be you'd be part of a company for 40, 45 years. Now you might be with one company for 7 years, the next company for 10 years. Well, that's not really feasible to maintain a pension plan between, whereas a 401k, you can roll that from the company, you can take it out and then move it to the next company or take it over to an IRA or whatever that might be. Whereas a pension plan is really tied to one company.
Absolutely. And with the pension plan, it used to be you worked 45 years for a company. They wanted to make sure you could retire because you spent your entire working career with them. But now people bounce around, And even some plans, for example, if you're under OPERS or STRS, the state pension plans, you actually get a choice when you go in which way you want to go. So, they have ones where you're the defined contribution, they call it member directed, basically, or they have the defined benefit where they might call it traditional. So you actually make the choice yourself how you want your pension to be, where other times it's just 100%, hey, when you join that company, this is what they do, and you have no say in the matter. So, the different factors, as you mentioned, hey, if you don't think you're going to be at that job for very long, that pension really isn't going to be that helpful. It's hard to take with you and move along somewhere. So maybe in that case, it works better to go with the defined contribution where you can, move it over to a 401k to a different provider. Well, where, hey, if you think you're going to be there for 50 years and you don't want to take any risk of what the market does, things like that, hey, go ahead and let's go with that defined benefit one.
Yeah, and that's another benefit of, we could parse off the benefit of a pension versus a defined contribution. But one of the other, trends that's been happening in a bad way is a lot of these pension plans are underfunded anyway. So you really need to know what that pension plan has been funded. Is it proper? Are you even going to get that money? Which is a scary thing. So there's a lot of people that really want to kind of take control of their own destiny, if you will, and manage it. Maybe they want to invest it differently. Maybe they want to take extra risk or less risk or whatever it might be. So that's a big thing there. And just taking control of that retirement, especially if the company puts money in. If you put in, like you said, 6%, and they match dollar for dollar. So if you put in $6,000, let's say, and the company puts in $6,000, well, you do that for 40 years, you should be able to build up a nest egg that is going to be helpful to you.
Absolutely, yes. And yeah, as far as the underfunding goes, it's, if there's a pension plan, they have auditors that check it and see that they're on track, but there are a lot of assumptions that go into those formulas. What's the return on bonds versus stocks going to be? How long are people going to live? So as those variables change, or as the market returns weren't what they anticipated, they basically can go back to the company and say, hey, you're underfunded, you have to put more in. And then the company's on the hook to come add more into it. So if that's not the case, where those numbers aren't working, in some circumstances, then they'll kind of change the formula or how they're paid out. And we've seen that in a lot of plans recently, where particularly one thing to really keep an eye on with your pensions is the cost of living adjustment. Where most private employer pension plans do not, from what I've seen, most of them don't provide a cost of living or, a raise each year, cost of living adjustment or a raise each year. So if you retire this year with a $30,000 pension, they're going to pay you $30,000 every year for the rest of your life. But 20 years from now, 30 years from now, things are going to cost twice as much as they do now, if, depending on what the inflation rate is. So, if that's the case, your pension is still what it was. It's not going to keep up with it. So, keep in mind, when you're making your decisions on your pension and trying to think about, planning for the future with that pension is, what is this going to buy by the end of my plan?
Right.
It's not going to buy as much. So, but we've seen that with some of the bigger pensions that do offer the cost of living. That, hey, look, we're kind of underfunded a little bit. We want to make sure we have the stability to pay out the pensions forever. What can we do to adjust it? Well, hey, let's cut back on that cost of living, or let's freeze it for a couple of years, things like that. So there are ways they can kind of change the rules as they go, even though they made you this promise. There are these other things that they did that helped, that maybe they can kind of change those rules as they go. So, kind of keep an eye out for that. But, the things can change over time. Just keep that in mind. But I'll tell you what, for retirees that have the pensions, they really enjoy it. It's that kind of, hey, here's the floor. I know I'm going to have this coming in. Let's say I've got this pension and Social Security. If I ever run out of, savings that I had to supplement that, I at least have that pension and Social Security.
Right.
But it's also important to keep in mind how that pension plays with Social Security. So, if you're in a state pension and you're in a state, there are, I don't know, 13 or 14 states that don't pay into Social Security while they're on their state pension. If you're in one of those, keep in mind that Social Security benefit is, maybe going to be cut back a little bit from offsets and the windfall elimination provision based off your pension. So make sure I guess the theme is just understand where everything's coming and how it all plays together when you're planning for it.
Right. And one thing, and again, to kind of remember a little bit here, and I've always wanted to make sure people understand, we talked a lot about like what is a defined benefit, and that's what people understand as being a pension, versus the defined contribution, which is closer to the side of a 401k, IRA, those types of cash balance plans, even though they can be cash balance in a pension too, depending on how they're set up. But I'm debating how deep I want to ask this question, but there are a lot of different types of pension plans, and they're just called different things. And they're either company sponsored, which means they fall under ERISA laws or Department of Labor laws. But the idea that it is a guaranteed income for life is the concept. So you could even have private, like you can go to any insurance company, take your 401k, convert it, and turn it into a life income. The only difference is that you did it with your money versus a company did it based on their calculations and these laws. And so it's really hard for a lot of people to kind of tie those together. So would you say that maybe the 3 or 4 major pension plans that people should be aware of in their sphere of their financial planning, obviously a private pension plan, whether it's with XYZ company, right, it's private. Then you have governmental, which is inclusive of maybe Social Security. Essentially, that is a pension. It is a government-based, it is funded by your taxes, your FICA, your company pays some, you pay some, but essentially that is a pension plan through the government. Am I saying that right?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
And then you have maybe a state pension. You have something like the state teachers, regardless of what state you're in. You have public employees. You have, am I right? Some of those are pension plans that are delivered instead of federal, through Social Security. It is through the state. But then you also have even federal employees, which is if you are actually an employee of a federal system, that goes under FERS, right? Federal Employee Retirement System.
Correct.
And so all of these kind of fall under this general concept of pension, right?
Correct. Yes, they're basically just different versions for different sources to an extent. Now, as you mentioned, Social Security is more like a pension. It's not really. It doesn't have the same ERISA laws that say an employer provided one has. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all the same basic concept. Is to think of it as if you're a defined benefit, it's a guaranteed income. Every month you're going to be collecting that check, or you're going to have that money. Sorry about that. You're going to have that money going into your bank account every month. You don't have to worry about it. It shows up that day, and you don't worry about it. Where then there's the defined contribution side, which these can still be pensions, a defined contribution pension, and you're on the hook. It depends on how it performs. And as you mentioned, if you made a choice and want to and feel better about the other version, there are ways you can go privately, kind of turn it into a guaranteed income. Technically, it's not a pension, but you're turning it into a guaranteed income through an insurance company at that time. So, and vice versa. A lot of times you may have a defined benefit pension at your work that says, okay, we're going to promise you X amount of dollars for the rest of your life, and you can say, you know what? A lot of them will offer a lump sum choice where you're saying, you know what? No, I'd rather put that money under my control. I'm going to go ahead and just take a one-time lump sum payout, roll it over to an IRA, as an example, and hey, it's mine. If I pass away tomorrow, my family will get it. And going back to the defined benefit, when you might look at a statement and see, hey, here's what your pension would be. Well, keep in mind that number. What's the survivorship for your loved ones on that? And what I mean by that is a lot of companies will, when they show your pension statement, they'll say, okay, we promise you $3,000 a month for the rest of your life. But that's if you choose the single life option, where at that point, when you retire, you're going to have to make a decision. Do I want to add survivorship on to my spouse, like joint and survivor benefit? Meaning, if I pass away, a percentage still goes on to my spouse or loved ones. It doesn't necessarily need to be a spouse. It depends on the plan and what they offer. But you could say, hey, look, if my statement says $3,000 a month, but if I pass away, I want my spouse to get every dime that I got. Well, maybe they're going to pull your pension amount back to $2,700 a month, knowing that they're going to have to pay out until the second of you die. Or you could add maybe, let's say, 50% survivorship, where, hey, if I'm $3,000 a month, they're only going to pull me back to $2,800 a month. But if I die, my spouse only gets $1,400, or half of what that is. So when you retire, a lot of times you'll be making that decision. So make sure once you make that decision, it's irrevocable. You can't go back and change it. So make sure you understand the consequences of that decision when you make it. But keep in mind that number you see on your statement may not be what you ultimately get if you do make an election like a survivorship or a lump sum, things like that.
Yeah, one of the things, two things was, I wanted to go into some of the questions as far as your options. You talked about the life and all those things, but also a lot of these do have these lump sum options. Can you go into that a little bit more? And we want to caveat that out there. That is a big, big, big deal. That if you have those options, you better do the studies, you better do the analysis to make sure that you're making the right choice for you. And there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word abuse, maybe that is the word, where people are influenced one way or the other where they shouldn't be. And it's really important to make sure that you study that, not just whether you do a life or joint or whatever that might be, but these lump sum options, it's real important to be really, really careful about that. And there's some options with even state plans that provide, some of these as well. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing is, am I right in the sense that with some of the state plans, when you start those now, you can choose now. In company private plans, you don't really always have that choice. But these state plans, am I right? You do have a choice?
choice as far as
whether you move it more towards the alternative retirement plan, the defined contribution versus the traditional, right?
absolutely, yeah. So, but you usually, typically with those plans, you make that decision right when you're hired. They do kind of typically will allow a kind of a do-over, I guess, an oops, I want the other one. But depending on which plan you're in, it might be, hey, it's one time in your whole career, or it's, hey, this particular year you can do it, but they each kind of these plans will act a little bit differently too, as far as what they do with what you already have built up over the time that you had and moving forward. So sometimes they'll let you do, you're making that choice when you get hired, which is kind of an overwhelming decision sometimes, because there are so many unknowns. And hey, you have to choose now. You only have 120 days, whatever it may be, to make the decision. And then once you make that decision, again, sometimes there's a kind of a one-time do-over, but for the most part, you're locked in to what that decision is. But then going back to that lump sum, that's on the back end, kind of saying, hey, I had that guaranteed income, but maybe I don't, for whatever reason, I don't want that much of a monthly income. I'd rather have that control and maybe more of a legacy aspect to be able to pass down to my kids, or whatever the case may be. Or I don't think I'm going to live very long, and I want to have the ability to pass it down.
That's a really good point. Let's throw that out there real quick. Back to, again, that decision. Many times, because again, your insight is really coming from the financial analysis, the planning perspective. When you and anybody who does good planning, again, we want to make sure that we really want to represent the industry as far as planning, make sure people understand that regardless of where you go, ask these questions. But it is important to do a lot of these calculations and not just willy-nilly select a benefit that you think might be best, because it depends on your age, it depends on your spouse age, the health of each of you, other income, other resources, what your expenses are. Where when you go through these calculations, it really may push us one way or the other. And so be very careful, but also with these lump sums, make sure that many times it's not just financial. Sometimes it's like you just said, we've had clients before where I don't have any kids and I've had cancer twice. Well, why would I want, and let's say I'm also very comfortable with the risk tolerance of the market. Well, for that person, why would you ever lock it into a life income, and then when you pass away, the money goes away and it doesn't go anywhere? Let me rephrase it. You have kids. You want a legacy in that situation.
Yep.
Whereas somebody else, I am so spooked about the market. My parents both lived to 100, right? And I don't have any kids. I don't have anybody to leave it to. Well, then why would you ever take the lump sum? If that income, that base income is good for a long period of time. And it's real important for people to really see that whole picture.
Absolutely. And even that, survivorship, if you're married, and some people just default to hey, I want the 100% survivor for my spouse. If something happens to me, I want to know they're taken care of. Well, but if, you're most likely going to outlive your spouse, and, then you'd be giving up for a longer period of time, a larger amount. Or what if you're both going to live to 100 and you took a smaller amount for 40 years, whereas maybe they would have been okay if you did that 50% survivorship and something happened to you. Hey, you would have been fine, but hey, if you both live a long time, you're going to have more to spend every month for your lifetime. Now, every situation is different. There's not there are a lot of situations where it's like, no, hey, it's important to have that 100% survivorship. So, everybody's a little different. Every situation is a little bit different. But yeah, like you said, know the different dynamics and how things will play out before you make that decision. Kind of look at the numbers from different ways and decide. And with that that lump sum option, it's not that guarantee, but it's like you mentioned, you've got to be comfortable with the market. Or if you're going to live a long time, but you prefer to have control of that money, you need a certain rate of return to come out ahead in that game. So if you're going to pull it all out and put it in something that's not growing, maybe you would have been better off doing the pension in the first place versus taking that lump sum. And yeah, when you're with a lot of the state pension plans, it's not necessarily the offer for a lump sum of the full amount. It's typically what they call a partial lump sum option payment. Yeah. So hey, up to a certain point, but hey, you're not allowed to just wipe your pension out and completely, unless you're saying, I'm completely removing myself from the system. And when we run those comparisons, usually you're better off staying in the system. I wouldn't say usually, I'd say almost always you're better off staying in the system than completely pulling out. So your only option may be for a part of it, partial lump sum, to about like a quarter of the amount, let's say.
And the last thing I just want to say that I think, and we're going to run over a hair here, so our apologies, but the last thing is making sure that people really do a good understanding of the value of going directly to your HR or to STRS or to Social Security. There is no replacement of going to the source, but just understand the source will not advise you, and they will not do the analysis required for the comprehensive view of what choice to make. And so if you work with an advisor, and again, regardless of if you work with a professional, their job is to paint this whole picture and help you see it in its aggregation, not just in its individual piece, how it applies with your home and your other income and your spouse and all of these things. But that aggregation, that advisor is not a replacement of going to the source. The source has the details about that specific pension, and make sure you talk to them. Now, an advisor could help you see it in the holistic source. So you really need both to make a good decision, and make sure you bring it all together and communicate with all the different pieces that you have. Nate, do you have anything you want to wrap up with? For those attendees, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to stick around and answer those, but appreciate it. Nate, do you have anything to parting advice, if you will?
No, I kind of what I mentioned earlier, just understand the ins and outs of each of the systems, wherever your pension is, is there a cost of living? What are my survivorship options? There are a lot of different, what happens if something happens to me early? Is there a reversion? Things like that. There are a lot of different kind of intricacies of these plans, and make sure you understand your plan inside out. And like you mentioned, go right to the source, call whoever it is that's running that plan, and make sure you understand it inside and out before you make that decision. Because when you retire and you sign that paperwork, you can't change your mind 2 weeks later. So right. Make sure, ask for another set of eyes to look at it that might be thinking of it a different way than you do. It's always
when you tell the HR department you're making a move, it's like the old for contractors, measure twice, cut once. You better do the analysis before you end up, cutting and severing ties. It's tough to go back and say, oops, I made a mistake. I want to change this. So absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Nate. For those of you still on the call, go ahead and send me your questions. We'll stick around if we have any. Otherwise, thanks a lot for attending. We'll see everybody tomorrow. We're going to have Russ Gallo tomorrow, and we'll see you all then, and have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate.